Buchanan moves.
And a second.
Wait a second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Waite.
Yes.
Move into the report of our treasurer of the Board of Education, Mr. Mike Young.
Okay, guys, anybody have any questions on the monthly reports? I guess while we're there, we have had some fraudulent activity, both on the main account at the bank as well as the payroll account. So we're now set up on what the bank had, the program is called Positive Pay. So basically anything we do from the time we started that, we can upload check registers to the bank and they will clear the checks as they come. Anything that was done prior to, we had to physically go in and say, yes, that check was okay, or that ACH was okay. The payroll account breach was a check written to a gentleman in Orlando, Florida that tried to use a app on his phone to clear it at Wells Fargo Bank. The first sign of that at the bank was it was a check number that was the same as one of our teachers in the month of December. So the bank caught it pretty quickly. So I'm not sure if we've been returned all the funds yet. They're working on that, but that's kind of been the delay. We didn't get the bank statements until Friday last week. So reconciliation didn't wrap up until yesterday morning. So you guys should have gotten those in the docs yesterday. But if there's any questions, I mean, nothing abnormal other than the fraud in the two accounts. The other item we have, obviously we have the normal community school, for the new members. You guys approve those just like we do the city side. So again, you'll get that bank rec, those financials to take a look at. The one thing that comes up this time of year is the alternative tax budget. We have to file with the county auditor by January 20th. The only thing, when you look at the funds that receive taxes, which are the general and the bond retirement, those numbers are all given to me by the tax numbers are given to me by the county auditor. The rest of the information, it's what I know from ODE and those kinds of things. It's pretty straightforward. It's about the same as last year on the tax side of it, because I think they're expecting to collect a lower percentage just with the inflation and the different pieces. The one thing that's really different, you go to the page that's got the color in that list all the other accounts kind of lumped together. Estimated receipts this year, or the current year, for special revenue was about $11 million higher last year. That's because of the COVID money. So for 24-25, will be no more COVID money. So we're kind of back to a normal, expectation of what we'll get in all the different grants, whether it's federal, state, local grants, those types of things would make up that $4.5 million that's there. Otherwise, the rest of them, they've got a little bit of an increase just based off of, again, inflation and different things. So with approval of this, I'll file it with the county auditor before the 20th, most likely sometime this week. And then once they have their budget hearing, their committees, they'll sign off and send it back. And then we do have a couple donations. Some local businesses have chipped in to pay for the shooting shirts for the middle school boys basketball teams.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Appreciate all that you and your team does for the district. Donations grant. Approve the following donations: $350 from Kessler Sign Company to be used for the Zanesville Middle School basketball, $500 from AJ's Fuel Mart, Food Mart, and Drive-Thru to be used for Zanesville Middle School basketball. May I have a motion, please? Clerk will move. And a second.
Buchanan seconds.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Lee.
Yes.
Mrs. Waite.
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan.
Yes.
I did hear from Mrs. Long, and she's she's struggling today. We'll have recommendations from Dr. Doug Baker, Superintendent.
Item 1, resignation certificated. Approve the resignation of Sue Graham, teacher at Zanesville High School, effective June 1st of 24. Reasons for the resignation is retirement. And approve the resignation of Allison Todd, nurse at Zanesville High School, effective January 2nd of 24. Reasons for the resignation is personal.
May I have a motion, please?
Leo move.
And a second. Clark will second. Is there any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Wade,
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark.
Yes.
Item 2, employment classified. Approve the employment of Samantha Rabagia, Secretary at John McIntyre Elementary, effective January 3rd of 24, pending background check. Rate of pay will be building secretary, step 1 from the appropriate salary schedule.
May I have a motion, please?
Wait will move.
And a second.
Leo second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Wade,
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee.
Yes.
Item 3, employment substitutes. Approve the following substitutes as listed, as and when needed, pending appropriate certification and background checks for the 23-24 school year.
May I have a motion, please?
Wait will move.
And a second.
Leo. Leo second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Wade,
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee.
Yes.
Item 4, salary adjustments certificated. Approve the following personnel as listed to be granted salary adjustments effective with the current contract year for second semester only. Reason for the adjustment is due to having completed requirements of a new classification on the salary schedule by virtue of additional study, pending receipt of official transcripts.
May I have a motion, please?
Buchanan moves.
And a second.
Wait will second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Wade.
Yes.
Item 5, salary adjustments classified. Approve a salary adjustment for Ryan Burrell, special education aide at Zanesville Middle School to reflect MD aide with AA step 0, effective December 22nd of 23 for additional education documentation. This is pending certification and background check.
May I have a motion, please? Clark will move. And a second.
Buchanan seconds.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Wade,
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Item 6, professional development restraint training. Approved pay Matt Winland, facilitator, and Ryan Burrell, trainee, for a 4-hour restraint training session on December 22nd of 23 at the administration building. Rate of pay will be $25 per hour. In addition, Matt Winland will receive $20 for completed paperwork.
May I have a motion, please?
Leo move.
And a second. Clark will second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Wade,
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark.
Yes.
Item 7, volunteers. Approve the following volunteers as listed with thanks and appreciation for Zanesville City Schools for the 23 and 24 school year, pending appropriate background checks.
May I have a motion, please?
Wait will move.
And a second.
Leo second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Wade,
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee.
Yes.
Item 8, FMLA leave of absence. Approve the following employee as listed for an FMLA leave of absence.
May I have a motion, please?
Wait will move.
And a second.
Leo second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Wade,
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee.
Yes.
Item 9, 21st century program teacher. Approve the following personnel as listed as after-school program teachers at the rate of pay of $40 per hour as and when needed for a portion of the 23-24 school year. Teachers will be funded by the Muskegon Behavioral Health Grant Funds and or the 21st Century Grant or ESSER funds.
Buchanan moves.
Wait
Wait
a
will
s-
second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Wade.
Yes.
Item 10, adjustment, Allwell Behavioral Health Services Agreement. Approve an adjustment in the amount to Allwell Behavioral Health Services Agreement originally approved on November 21st of 23, Zanesville City Schools Board meeting to reflect $25,000 instead of $20,000.
May I have a motion, please? Clark will move. And a second.
Buchanan seconds.
Any discussion?
Just why, I mean, was there a reason why?
Kevin, on the adjustment, Mark?
So when they figure out the hours for the year from her start date, she's basically full-time.
Yep.
Ended up running more than what they originally quoted because she was able to start earlier than what they thought, because they basically had to hire a new person.
Gotcha.
So they're able to get her in November. They didn't think they got her training quick.
Okay.
So the nice thing is we get a full-time counsel.
Yeah.
In building.
Yep.
And our share of it's only $25,000, and she's there full-time.
Yeah.
Really quite a good deal for us, anyway, but to cover her hours, but. So the contract back into the original.
Perfect.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
Which building is this, St. Gray?
Is she at Zangare, Mark?
She's a primary goal.
Zangare Elementary. Yeah. Thank you. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Wade,
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Item 11, Muskingum Valley Park District easement. Approve the attached easement for ingress and egress with Muskingum Valley Park District. The easement is to allow the Park District to construct and maintain a sidewalk on lots 9 and 10 of the Henry Jones addition to the town of Putnam, located on Muskingum Avenue. This sidewalk will connect Putnam Greenway Bike Trail with the existing sidewalk on Pierce Street.
May I have a motion, please?
Leo move.
And a second. Clark will second. Discussion for new people. It's right out back here.
So you've
Yeah.
got Elba's house here, and then we own the lot on the other side. So the trail will end just on the north side of his property. Come across the street, they want to build a sidewalk along Muskingum Avenue to connect to the sidewalk on Pierce Street down here.
Okay, so
So
they will
And they will
maintain that.
maintain it also.
And do we have any liability if someone were injured in that section that they're going to be
I
using?
would say they would be liable if they don't maintain it. I mean, it says specifically in the easement that
Okay.
they are to maintain it.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Wade,
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark.
Yes.
Item 12, policy item for approval. It's policy 9550.02, community schools oversight and evaluation.
May I have a motion, please?
Wait will move.
And a second.
Lee will second.
Any discussion?
Can you explain this to me?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Baker.
Zanesville City Schools is the sponsor of Zanesville Community High School. And as the sponsor, we have certain responsibilities. And one of those responsibilities is the oversight of their program and what they're doing. This policy is part of that process. Now, in addition to being part of the process of oversight for their school as their sponsor, there's also an evaluation that takes place of the sponsor. So as the sponsor, we have to submit documents to the Department of Education and Workforce. And for the last 3 years, we've done so well on our sponsor report card, and they've done so well on their report card that we've been exempt. This next year, coming up, we're back into the full evaluation. So we wanted to update and make sure our policies were where they needed to be. So as we approach this new evaluation period.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion on that? Good questions. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Wade,
Yes.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark,
Yes.
Mrs. Lee.
Yes.
Then you have some other items for review, and they're reviewed 1 month and then approved the following month. So that gives you time to look through them or ask any questions if you have. The two with the community school are for the same rationale as the one we just approved. And the one with the high school is their updated curriculum guide, because they'll be rolling into scheduling for next year.
And those were in the Google Doc folders that you can open when you get that information from Mrs. Riley, when she sends that information out. And they're still there, to look at.
Okay.
So any policy will be, you'll get it 1 month review it before the next month. And so these policies will be on next month for approval.
Okay,
So you can open those up and look at them and see what they are. The curriculum's all there. I reviewed all that the last couple of days. So yeah.
And you can always call
Right,
anyone down here
right.
to ask additional questions. You don't have to wait to the board meeting.
okay, perfect.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. Committee updates. Mrs. Lee, anything with
Nothing with
legislation?
legislative liaison's been pretty
Yeah,
quiet because of Christmas break. So, not a whole lot with student achievement, other than I just wanted to make sure that other board members also were invited to the Workforce Summit, which is at the Mideast board or Mideast campus on Wednesday, the 17th of January from 5 to 7:30. They're having a speaker there, and I was at the board meeting last night for Mideast, and they wanted me to relay to the rest of the board that you're welcome to come. I know I'm registered. If you want to come, just let me know and I'll let Mr. Sheridan know if he would like to go. So there's going to be a speaker there that kind of Penne, I think his name. Am I correct that way? But he came in and kind of did some work with Mideast on their career trees for each of their areas. So he's a pretty dynamic speaker. So they're looking forward to that.
Okay.
Lori, can you repeat this date? January 17th?
January 17th
At Mideast.
at Mideast, 5 to 7:30.
Okay.
They're doing like hors d'oeuvres at 5 o'clock there in their common area, I think. So,
I'll go to it.
okay, I'll let Matt know. Anybody else want to go? If you can.
Sure. Free to
Can
do
I
that.
check my calendar?
Yeah,
Get back
yeah,
to you?
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You can email me, text me, whatever.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Audit, anything, Mr.? Yeah.
Oh, they should be back next week to start wrapping things up. Should be done by the end of the month. Just a few loose ends from, filing the report in December, waiting on the work papers from Schoenhart, those kind of things. So again, as Lori mentioned with the legislative stuff, holidays kind of slowed things down. So she did email me late last week. She was going to send me a list of things they still need to do. And then I would assume they'll be back sometime early next week.
Insurance. Did we?
No, we're still struggling on some large claims, so don't be surprised if there's not a transfer in advance next month.
Buildings and Grounds Committee meets next Tuesday.
16th.
Yep. So that'll be up and coming. And Business Advisory is also January the 23rd here at the board office.
Yeah.
And
Buildings and Grounds is 8 o'clock here. And-
AM or PM?
AM.
Dr. Baker?
Yeah.
AM?
Yeah, and the Business Advisory is new.
I told you, I think I already told you I couldn't make that one
Yes.
this time. Okay.
And with them coming on, so they can try to put that on their calendars.
It's a great meeting.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
good food usually.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
tell me
Yeah.
again, the business advisory is at noon?
Noon on the
Down
23rd.
in the commons down here.
On the 23rd?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay,
Since the chef's back, this one might be the chef's.
Oh, well, there you go.
board office, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I can send out the agenda.
That'd be perfect, thank you.
Closing comments, just we welcome our 2 new board members, and I know we're winding down the semester, and I was out in the buildings today and they're testing and ramping up for the new semester. So we're on that other slope now. So we don't need to go into executive session. So let's move to be it resolved that the Zanesville City Schools Board of Education meeting is adjourned at
5:30.
5:39 PM. May I have a motion, please?
Buchanan moves.
And a second?
I guess it comes back around to me.
Yep.
Wait, we'll second.
Any discussion?
Had to go. Full
Roll call,
circle.
please.
Mrs. Buchanan,
Yes.
Mrs. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Wade.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.
Yeah. Nice.
So you want me to sign this now that we did the oath?